Well, we're sorry about the air conditioning. We had someone come to work on it this week and said it was working, but we got here this morning and it wasn't. So he's coming back this week and hopefully we'll have it. I really didn't notice. I feel pretty good.
Work out positive.
I should have thought about having an award for the person who came the furthest to join us in worship day, which I guess will be Casey. I don't think anybody came further than Hawaii, did you? Well, just glad to have you here. I want to remind you too, the week is here. If you have a spirit of heaviness and want to get rid of it, you can do that at the Rekindle the Flame if it doesn't happen this morning. The garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness is the theme. And that's the theme that our country needs, is it not? Yes. So Rekindle Flame, it starts Thursday. What's the time Thursday?
9 a.m.
9 a.m. Thursday morning. I couldn't remember if it was morning or not. Anyway, you can register online. Beverly and I are registered. We're going to be there and hope to see many of you there as well. Well, our text for today is John chapter 8, verses 31 through 36. John chapter 8, beginning at verse 31. To the Jews who had believed him, Jesus said, "If you hold to my teaching, you're truly my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." They answered him, "We're Abraham's descendants, and we've never been slaves of anyone. How can you say that we shall be set free?" Jesus replied, "Very truly I tell you, anyone who is a slave, who sins, is a slave to sin. Now a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed." Would you pray with me, please? Well, God, as we ponder today what it means to be free indeed, let us hear your truth and let us know that truth, believe that truth, that we might be free. Not only free, but free indeed. Amen. Well, today we celebrate our liberty. It was July the 4th, 1776, 245 years ago, that these 13 British colonies declared their independence from British rule. That declaration begins, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." As you well know, a war with England resulted from that declaration. A war that lasted a little over 5 years when the British surrendered at Yorktown. October 1781. Against overwhelming odds, impossible odds, America had won its independence. But that liberty was costly. Many, many people lost their lives, their fortunes, their homes, in the process of winning freedom for a new nation. Once, as I was pondering these things on 4th of July, I remembered something I heard in an address, a sermon really, by the Reverend Dr. Vume Dundala. He was a black man from South Africa who later became a bishop After that, became the leader of a regional Christian coalition that included many of the nations in the African continent. The oppressive government of South Africa called apartheid was still active and in force when I heard him speak, which would have been in the mid-1980s. And so he made this statement that struck my heart when he himself, as a black man or a native African, was living under the severe oppression of apartheid. But in that address, Dr. Varnado said this: there is no liberty unless the oppressor is also liberated. Otherwise, the oppressed who win their liberty become new oppressors. You see, there was a problem lurking in the shadow of America's great victory. Our forefathers had founded the land of the free, but at the same time, some of them owned slaves. As tobacco and cotton farming grew in importance in our economy, particularly in the South, we fully embraced slavery as an economic necessity. The oppressed, who had won their liberty, became new oppressors. But the seed of liberty was loose in this land, and it continued to cry out for liberty and justice for all until we came to the point of armed conflict again over the cause of liberty. Only this time we were fighting among ourselves. Several years ago, our family had the occasion to visit Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The sight, I cry when I even think about being there. The site of one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War. And I want you to listen to a portion of what Beverly wrote about that visit. When it was all said and done, there was more loss of life on these fields than in any other battle fought in North America at any time. More than 51,000 were killed, wounded, or missing. So many of them were just boys. The dead and dying were all over the fields of Gettysburg. And the sweet people of that town took care of all of them, north or south. There were hasty burials, but it was decided to move the dead and create a national cemetery in Gettysburg for the Union dead. President Abraham Lincoln came for the dedication of this cemetery. And one of the great orators of the time, Edward Everett, was asked to give the principal address. He delivered a well-received 2-hour speech. We can't even believe that today, can we? 2-hour speech. Lincoln was next. He spoke for only 2 minutes. Everett later said to President Lincoln, "I should be glad if I came as near to the central idea of the occasion in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes." Listen again to the Gettysburg Address. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on the great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who gave their lives that the nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or to try. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. That this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom. And that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Beverly contends in her writing, this was a grim period in a nation's history. But for those who were living under the shackles of oppression, this war brought freedom. Freedom is always costly. That's a lesson I hope our children carried away with them when we left Gettysburg. There is a verse in Psalm 105 which says, they fell heir to what others had toiled for. That's where we are. We have fallen heir to the benefits of what so many gave their lives for. Not only in this war, but in every war in which we fought. Even with all of this country's flaws, it is still great because of so many who have given all and still are giving all. As President Lincoln said, the last full measure of devotion. But even though the Civil War won liberty for American slaves and preserved the Union of the United States of America, in a sense, those slaves still remain oppressed in our society. It was another 100 years before the cries of liberty again reached the ears of America through a man named Martin Luther King Jr. I was a teenager then, raised in the deep South, and well trained in the way of subtle racial prejudice. I had little respect or use for Dr. King. A book of his sermons was mandatory reading in one of my seminary classes. I strongly advise anyone who wants to criticize the man to read that book of sermons. As I began reading, I wept because I realized that this man had really been to the mountain. He had been there. He had heard from God, and he spoke the truth. There are two major points of freedom that emerge from all of this. And maybe it's just one point with two sides, two facets. But the first is this. Freedom is more than political liberty. You can pass laws about liberty all you want. But freedom is more than just being politically free. People can be free even when they're in bondage. And likewise, they can be in bondage even when they're free. This is the land of the free, founded upon principles of political and personal liberty. But we have a sordid history of oppression against Native and African Americans. Even when we legislated liberty, you see, the hearts of our people were still filled with prejudice and hatred. Still the case with some. Still the case. Now, progress has been made, for sure. But we've not reached the promised land. You can tell that by what goes on in our culture. The second point is this. Only Jesus can make us free indeed. You can't legislate it, you can't demand it, you can't enforce it with police. Only Jesus can make us free indeed, as he said. He said, if you are my disciple, you adhere to my teaching, you're really my disciple, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And I'm the Son, and when I set you free, you are free indeed. Why only Jesus? There are two reasons for that. True freedom is a heart issue. It's not a legal issue, it's a heart issue. Yes, it has legal, societal, and personal dimensions. But it is a heart issue. And I said, even when we legislate liberty, if the hearts of the people in that society aren't liberated, personal freedom can be seriously limited. So true liberty requires a change of heart. And Jesus is the only source of heart-changing power. I don't know of any other power on earth that can change the human heart but Jesus. We don't want to be oppressors. We want people to have liberty, because it's out of that liberty comes the creativity that helps us grow as a nation and prosper and find new ways to make our way in this world. The second reason why only Jesus can make us free indeed is that true freedom is a love issue. It's a heart issue, and it's a love issue. God is the author and the source of all true love. There are other things that give us a similar emotion to love, and I'm talking about agape love. Love that gives itself for the beloved. Love that doesn't require anything in return, but gives itself freely and genuinely. And the source of that love is only God. And its constant companion is liberty. If you really love someone, you don't want to constrain them and constrict them and inhibit them. You give them liberty. That's why we have liberty with God. Frightening freedom is what I call it. God gives us the right and the freedom to say no to Him. The devil, on the other hand, is the author and the source of pride and hatred. And their constant companion is bondage. I should add greed in that. Pride, greed, and hatred. And you look what fuels all the oppressive governments of this land. It's pride and hatred, greed, some of it false religion. Jesus said, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Paul expanded that a bit in Romans 6:16. He said, we are the slaves to that which we obey. So if we harbor anger and bitterness and prejudice in our hearts, we become their slave. If we are controlled by low self-esteem or irrational fears, we are their slaves. If we have addiction issues, we are the slaves of whatever we're addicted to. Now, the root of all such bondage, you see, are lies that we believe. And that's why Jesus said, if you hold my teaching, you will know the truth of God. And that truth will set you free. Now, today we celebrate liberty and honor those who gave the last full measure of devotion for the cause of liberty. Patriots who died on the battlefield, but also patriots like Martin Luther King, who died confronting the enemies of liberty that lurk in our society. Well, let's not forget that the true honor must go to the one who started it all when he died on the cross to set us free from all the enemies of liberty that lurk in our hearts. Jesus is the one who inspired and empowered those early patriots, Martin Luther King Jr. and others that followed him and are still following the way of liberty. Jesus is the one who defeated the devil and sets us free from all bondage. He has said, I have given you authority to trample on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing will harm you. If we're enslaved today, it's only because we've not received and put to use the power that comes to us through the truth Jesus delivered and what he offered us through his death on the cross. When the Son sets you free, you're free indeed. Amen. So when the fireworks go off tonight, again, they went out last night, the night before too. When they go off tonight, let's rejoice. That we're Americans, yes. But in truth, that we're residents of the kingdom of God. That's what is true. And as part, we are Americans. And we want a country that respects and acknowledges the liberty that God gives us. So we want to know the truth. Christ is risen, and freedom has shone forth from the grave, from the tomb. Christ is risen, and the demons of oppression are cast down. Christ is risen, and we can be